Everyone. Today is April the 24th, and this is the Pacific Division Feeding Capacity Building Series. This series is brought to you by the Pacific Division Feeding Leadership. My name is Yi-Wei. I'm your host. I'm a volunteer from the Los Angeles region. Today, we're going to talk about documents, data, and all the forms that we need to operate our feeding operation. And Hillary, it is all yours.
Thanks, Yi-Wei. You didn't want to sing the documents, data, and forms, oh my. So disappointed in you.
I leave it to you to do that.
That was my ode to the Wizard of Oz. But anyway, hi all, thanks for coming. I am Hillary King. I'm from Northern California coastal region, and I am, as you can see, going to talk to you all about the exciting documents and forms and all the data that exists on a disaster response around the feeding activity. And I'm going to try to drive my own presentation. If someone please yell if I talk about things that you don't see. Okay, so I will move to the next slide. So other sessions we've talked about paperwork, just sort of in passing, and mentioned it in general, as well as some specifics like 6409s and purchase orders and tracking of meals and that type of thing. And tonight we're going to dive a little bit deeper into these things. And we're going to do this from the standpoint of a response where we're not using a partner kitchen like the Southern Baptist or anything like that. So we'll touch on ordering meals, tracking meals, payments and reconciliations, and reporting. Okay, so what I kind of wanted you to get from this slide is just the idea that we have a process. Everything in Red Cross, you know, is a process. And in feeding, that process yields data that's needed for making feeding decisions, for planning, and for financial management. So we start by getting information from the shelters or from other areas we'll touch on later. We figure out what we need to order. We ask for that food, we receive that food, and all those bits and pieces flow together into some usable data for the feeding leadership at headquarters, as well as the overall disaster response or DRO leadership. So this snazzy little image there, which is a little scary now that I see it bigger, we're talking about how data can help us improve our service delivery and our efficiency. So obviously the meal needs are not static in a response, and counts can change for a lot of reasons. The population in shelters might be going up and down. People begin going back to school or work, so maybe they're not there in the middle of the day, so we don't need to have as many lunches brought in. As people are allowed to repopulate previously evacuated areas. All of these things will make us want to make adjustments to both potentially the types of meals we're serving as well as the quantity. And that obviously can help us with our service delivery tracking and planning. So that's all sort of overview. So we're talking about data and how are we going to get that data? How do we get that information that we need to run this feeding operation from our shelters, from our teams on the emergency response or ERVs, and potentially other feeding sites? So headquarters, whoever is doing feeding at headquarters will determine how they want to collect the information. And there's a number of different ways. We have the possibility of the shelters or the ERV staff calling information into headquarters. Either of those could text or email it in. On the flip side, headquarters could text or call the staff at these locations and ask for their information, or my favorite is someone in headquarters can create a simple form and send out a link to it, and the people out in the field can just fill in the blanks real quick, and that data will then populate into a spreadsheet that makes it very easy to look at. And that image there is an image of what it would look like on your phone if you were out in the field and headquarters sent you a questionnaire to get your data. Super simple. Eventually, Skya will have reports that will show us client counts, that will show us special meals, and any other type of thing we might want to know about feeding, but that is not yet available. It's in the queue, as they say. So now we have some basic info that we need, and we need to turn that info into food because clients can't eat data. So let's say that you've been asked to order lunch for a shelter and you have all the information you need. In this unicorn of a shelter, there's no special dietary restrictions or special meals needed, so everyone can get the same thing. What you're going to need to do is create a disaster requisition or a 6409, which you're seeing part of here on your screen. And you're going to need to complete that in order to sort of start the ball rolling on this process. So usually a copy of a 6409 is linked in the Incident Action Plan, or IAP. And if you remember, that's the daily document that comes out from our friends in Information and Planning. Hi, Tim, I see you there. And it often will have a link to a 6409 that is partially filled in with some information from this particular disaster response that we're working on. It's a fillable PDF form, so it allows you to open it up and just start typing to fill in the blanks, or you could have a printed copy. Whatever way you can get this done is great, no problem. And if you do it as a fillable form, you'll notice that what you start putting in gets replicated further on down the document itself, so you don't have to keep typing the same thing over and over, which is nice. So if we start at the top of this, I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but the general goal is you need to fill in all of the blanks on this first page, with the exception of the requisition number over here, because that's typically logistics will put that in for you. But you've got your DR number, if you have one. You've got the name of it. In this case, this was from our California Atmospheric Rivers last year. Your name and information as the requester, the delivery information of what you're requesting is going to. So in this case, it was the Wackford Community Center, which was one of our shelters. The address, the phone number, all of that. One thing I will point out, just in case anybody wants to bust me on it, we're missing something here on this particular 6409, and that is right here, the site POC, so the site point of contact. In this case, you can see it was a very small shelter. There were only 8 clients, so not a big deal that the person was missing, but if you had a shelter with a couple hundred people and maybe a dozen Red Crossers walking around and some event-based volunteers, you'd want to have a name in there. So whoever is bringing in this case, the food from Kentucky Fried Chicken, or KFC, I guess it's called now, would know who to find and not just leave it with anyone. But anyway, so that's kind of the contact information, the location, where it's going. And then you'll see we get into the details of what this request is for. And in this case, we're ordering 8 fried chicken meals. And you'll notice that it's got quantity, unit of measure, and total quantity. The most important thing there is for the total quantity to be right. In this case, it's super easy. We're just ordering 8 meals. They come, one by one. So we want 8 meals total. If you were ordering, say, I don't know, you wanted 5 dozen donuts, you could put 5 and then under unit of measure, dozen, and then total would be 60, if my math is right. Anyway, our description is fried chicken meals. The date needed is, I'm assuming the same day that this is being filled out since we were ordering lunch for that day. Really important to note that the date needed needs to be a date, particularly when you're ordering different kinds of supplies outside of feeding, but you can't just say ASAP because people don't know what that means. You've got to put a real date in there. So then we've got our vendor. It's KFC in Elk Grove, where this shelter was. And then down here, you can see there's a space for special instructions. And in that, you can put anything that might help make this request quite clear to whoever is going to get the product for you, the meals in this case. What we've got in here is just describing that it was client meals and the cost of it and how it was paid for. And we'll talk a little bit about why that detail is important in a second. So we're going to keep moving on. And this is just the next section down. This top part is the next section down of that front page of the 6409. So in order to have your 6409 be legitimate, it needs to be approved. And very importantly, it needs to be approved by someone who has the authority on that operation to spend money. So you'll see here this approver section. In this case, it was Vicki, who has spoken to us in this series before, and she was the headquarters feeding manager. And you'll notice my blue, nope, not the blue arrow. Down here, sorry, the red circle is showing me within the incident action plan, the IAP, there's a list of what people on that response are allowed to spend money and up to what amount. So we can see here that whoever filled out this 6409 saw that the feeding manager, Vicki, was allowed to spend up to $5,000, and our $70 worth of chicken was well within that. So the other final part we want to talk about on this page is the account string. And this is a lovely series of numbers that you do not need to memorize, but it basically tells Red Cross finance people what sort of account should this particular expenditure go towards. And all of that large series of numbers is saying that this is on a disaster response and it was for mass care, et cetera, et cetera. And I just wanted you to notice also, you can see for the blue arrow, this is another piece that is typically in your incident action plan. It will show you what the account string for your particular DRO is. If it's not there, if that hasn't made it into the IAP yet, or it's early on and you don't have an IAP, that's okay. You can ask somebody, you can ask finance, supply people can help you figure it out. Not a problem. Oh, and then the last thing is you just have to check which method of payment you use. So in this case, we know it went on a P card. Okay, so after you've got this all filled out, you're going to send it to your approver. And you can either do that in a paper version, or one of the great things to come out of us going a little more virtual during COVID was that it's perfectly acceptable to attach this document to an email, send it to the person that you're asking to approve, and they will forward it on and mark it as approved. So much easier than having to physically track people down to get signatures. Okay. Now you'll notice this looks very similar to what we were looking at before. This is the 6409's B portion. And that's essentially the receipt. So y'all know if somebody orders something in a corporate environment, when they get that thing, you've got to sign off saying, yes, I received it, or I ordered 100 of widgets, but I only got 95. And so I would mark that I only got 95. That is what you would mark, or whoever's receiving what was ordered with this 6409 would mark that discrepancy down here, and then they'd go ahead and sign it off. I mentioned earlier on that information that you put in on that first page will automatically populate later in the document, and this is what I was talking about. So all of this top part was automatically populated from the first page. So one hot tip I have is, since there are often many 6409s that need to be completed each day, you can always pull a copy, fill in the parts that won't change, and save that as a template so you don't have to type the DR number and name each time. You don't have to type the name and address of your shelter, for example, because those would be the same each time, your name and contact info, but the vendor, the quantity, and the description probably will change, so you don't want to save them as part of your template. Okay, so that's the gist of the 6409. So now, if you think back, what are we doing? We're part of a process, right? So now we just requested something. We've got our order ready, and obviously the vendor, whether it's a local restaurant, a caterer, a grocery store, a food truck, whoever you're getting this food from is, of course, going to want you to pay. Right? We've got to pay for things, unfortunately. So how are we going to pay? And there's a lot of ways to pay for food on a disaster. We've got your mass care procurement card. And remember that that's issued often early in a disaster to shelter or feeding supervisors might get those. And that's the one that looks just like a mission card. It's not in a person's name, it just says American Red Cross on the front of it. Another option is a purchase card or a P card, and that is a credit card that's issued in someone's name, either a volunteer or an employee of Red Cross. It's not red like the mission cards are or the MCPC, so you won't get them mixed up. And if you have one, you'll know. and you'll be trained in how to use it. So if you're wondering what the heck is that, that means you don't have one. So don't worry, just know that they can be used to pay for food or other items on a disaster. There's almost always someone on the disaster response that has a P card that can be used for buying meals when we're buying them from local restaurants, local vendors. So if you're working in a shelter and nobody has a card to be able to pay for meals that we need, check with headquarters and they can take care of it for you. Not a problem. Importantly, do not put client meals on your mission card. Please, please. That is for your personal meals and expenses. And it just goofs everything up if you put client items, even meals, on your personal mission card. And you can see with the bold and the exclamation points, please get a receipt. Whenever you order something, pick something up, have it delivered, what have you, get a receipt. If you're ordering from, say, like a DoorDash or a Grubhub type thing, you'll automatically get a receipt online, which is great. It'll get emailed to you. If you're getting something from a food truck or a deli or whatever, just get a paper receipt because you will need it and you'll be pretty unhappy if you don't have one later on. So let's talk a little bit about why. So you've got this 6409, you've got your receipt, you got the food, you paid for it. You want to scan or take a photo with your phone if need be, no problem. So you can save a digital copy of your receipt and probably your 6409 as well. So you're going to have those two and they're going to match. They're going to have the same dollar amount. They're going to have the same vendor and what it was for. And then you're going to want to have a spreadsheet of some sort, or if you don't do spreadsheets, you're going to have a piece of paper that you've created a log on where you're going to record, in this case, that we got 8 meals from Kentucky Fried Chicken and what the date was and the amount and how it was paid for. And those 3 things are all going to match up. You're going to want to keep up with this paperwork along the way. Trust me, I've been there where that didn't happen, and it can pile up very quickly and you can get behind and find that you don't have any time to do anything except get your paperwork in order. So keep up with it all along the way. Okay, so now we've got these documents. What are we going to do? This is something I believe Mary brought it up quickly last week. And I don't know if Julia is on here, but I got this tip from her and didn't understand why she was insisting on it at the beginning. But by the end of my time on that DRO, I absolutely understood why you want to create a naming convention for your documentation. And that's because by the end of it, you're going to have so many meals and so many receipts and so many 6409s that you're going to want to be able to pair those documents up with each other. Somebody from finance or from logistics is going to come and have a question about one of your receipts or something, and you're going to want to be able to find these things very easily. So if you look at this fun little pretend receipt box, this long thing right here is what I've named the receipt document. So remember, I probably took a picture of my receipt and I changed the name of it to receipt January 20th, Monterey Fairgrounds lunch, DoorDash - Little Caesars, $187.25, HK, that's me, P card, and then the pretend numbers of my P card. That's a really, really, really long file name, but When I've got 100 of them, I want to be able to go straight to the one that I'm looking for. And so I need all that info. Over here with my 6409, I've done the exact same naming convention, except instead of saying receipt at the beginning, I say 6409. So it's really easy to pair those two up when I need to reconcile. And then down here, this is just a sample of a receipt tracker. And it's probably too small for you, but it says the date, it says Monterey Fairgrounds, it says Little Caesars with the amount and that it was lunch and it was on my P card. So I've got my three-way match there and it's all very neat and easy to find. If I just called my receipt Little Caesars or receipt for a date, I would never be able to find it and match it up to the other documentation that I have. I do also suggest that if you are kind of in charge of keeping track of all this documentation, that you create a filing system for yourself for all these electronic versions of things. And maybe if you're working with multiple shelters, you have a folder for each shelter or something that will help you keep things organized and help you be able to share them as needed. Okay, that's enough of that page. So now you've got the pieces, right? You've got your receipt, you've got your 6409, you've got your tracker. That's all well and good, but what are you doing with those things? So a copy of those supporting documents for every transaction will go to the supply function, which is part of logistics on the DRO. And usually you'll find that they have a supply email address that's specific to that DRO, and you can just email it off to them and be glad that you've kept up with it. If you have used a mass care procurement card to pay, you're also going to need to turn in an expense register and with copies of the receipts and the 6409s. If you've used a P card, you don't turn that in, but whoever is the holder of the P card has to do a reconciliation on a particular website, and they're going to need those 6409s and receipt files so they can upload them. It's really, really important because we're sharing this information and because we tend to have responses that go on beyond any one person's 2 weeks working on it. It's really important that all that documentation be kept somewhere where other people can get at it. Best practice is to keep it on the Teams site for that DRO, because that way, if you go home, your 2 weeks are up and I come in behind you, I don't have to call you and say, hey, do you still have that receipt from KFC from that one day when I think it was lunch? You don't want that call when you're home resting. You want to make sure that people have access to that documentation. And again, please keep up with this paperwork along the way, not only for yourself and for the feeding activity at headquarters, but also the people in supply do not want to get a stack of 100 receipts and 6409s from you as you're about to head out the door to go home off the DR. That won't make them happy at all. And we want to work well with our friends in logistics. And I mentioned quickly the MCPC expense register. You have to turn that in and complete it either when you leave the operation at the end of your time or prior to that, if your balance gets low and you need to get a reload of it, they're going to want to see this documentation beforehand. And on OneSource, there is a job tool for MCPCs that has all the information you need. And I actually have a slide at the end where I've put in links to different things on OneSource that I've referenced. So you'll have that handy. Okay, so now we're going to stop talking about documentation and we're going to move on. Iwe, did you want me to pause for questions or do you want me to just go ahead and do the rest and then we'll do questions after?
Let's finish and we'll do the question at the end. We have
Okay.
about 10 minutes for the presentation.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've talked about documentation and now we're talking about tracking of meals. So another really important way to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the affected community, but not going overboard to the point where we're wasting money, time, effort. A way to make sure that we're doing a good job with that is to compare how many meals did we actually serve versus how many we ordered or bought. So if you've got a shelter and you've got 100 people in it, and we brought 100 lunches, but only 50 people took lunch, then that's not doing a really good job, right? Sure, we've met the need, but we've far exceeded it to the point where we're wasting a lot of food and money, and we don't want to do that. And then similarly, we want to make sure that if we ordered 100 lunches, that we actually got them and not 70 or 80. Both because we want to make sure we have enough food for everyone, and also so we're not paying for meals that we didn't get, right? Nobody wants to pay for 100 and only get 80. So we want to keep track of what did we order, what did we receive, what did we serve? And by serving, I mean meals that clients actually took. And then what was the excess? I'm going to jump forward. Again, please don't be frightened by that scary looking little snippet of a spreadsheet there. There's not a standard tracker that comes from National, but there are a lot of options. And you can always, if you're working in feeding, you can always ask somebody who's done it before to let you use one of their trackers. This particular image is from a pretty fancy one that we were using in Maui. But just to let you know, basically what it's doing is saying, what's the location? What's the shelter? Where is the food coming from? We're going to skip that one because it's not relevant. How many people are in that shelter? Some notes on any special meals, so whether there were allergies or vegan, vegetarian, that kind of thing. And then for each meal during the day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, how many did we order? How many were delivered? And how many did we serve? Out here, we've got the total of ordered, delivered, and served. And then this fancy little column out here was saying, okay, what was our rate of uptake for the meals? So again, if we ordered 100 lunches and only 50 went to clients and the other 50 ended up in the garbage, that's not good. And this fancy little spreadsheet actually said if it's at a certain percentage of uptake, we're going to color that green. And if people only took 50% of the meals, then we're going to color that red. So that told us that we needed to make some adjustments to the orders we were making or figure out why people weren't eating the food. And if you're skilled in Excel or you're working with someone that's skilled in Excel, they can build one that does some of these fancier calculations. And if not, and you just want to write down on a piece of paper every day what those ordered, delivered, and served numbers are, we'll find somebody with some Excel skills to put it into a spreadsheet for you. And don't worry, because this tracking is done by headquarters staff, not by someone working on an IRV or in a shelter. So don't be afraid. Don't run away thinking you need to know how to do complicated spreadsheets. You don't. Okay. So at the end of the day, and yes, I mean that literally, there's one last spot where that type of feeding data has to go, and that's called the Disaster Operations Control Form, which most people don't know what that name is because everyone calls it the 5266. And one thing that's nice is if you haven't worked in sheltering or in feeding in the last couple years, take heart. They've made this document easier. It used to be that they collected a lot more data. We had to count a lot more things like how many granola bars did we give out and how many waters. And we're not doing that anymore. So there's fewer pieces of data that have to go in, and all the meals that go in are from the same day. It used to be split and people would get quite confused. So currently the only thing that feeding headquarters people enter in the 5266 collection tool are the number of normal meals served that day by location. So if you have 5 shelters, you're going to have 5 lines and you're going to put how many meals were served that day, one number total per each location. And then if you served any shelf stable meals, so meaning heater meals, MREs, that type of thing, kind of the packaged astronaut meals, Army meals. And that's it. It used to be a much scarier document than it is now. So this last bullet, super important. The latest that the headquarters team can put numbers into this document is 7 p.m. And they have to do some things before those numbers go in. So it's really important if you're working out in the field and they say, we need you to get us your meal counts by 6 p.m. or by 6:30 p.m., please respect those deadlines, because it's literally the last numbers that go into that spreadsheet before someone from finance has to take it and do their magic to it. So if you're late, then everybody is late. And I can assure you that if you're looking at a shared document and you're waiting for numbers to come in from the field, and you can see the little bubble with the head of the finance person, and they're waiting for you to put the numbers in, it's a little disconcerting. Not to worry if you're not completely finished serving. If you need to make a correction to your number, that can be done the following day. It's not a problem. I know this is much too small for you to read. I just wanted you to have a look at it. This is the feeding tab of a many sheltered operation. It's got your days going across the top and all your locations here down the side, and you just pop in the total meals for that day and on you go. Looks like a lot of fun, I know. Okay. So the last thing that we're going to talk about is purchase orders. So what I've been talking about thus far is if you're buying and paying for meals from your local grocery store or a vendor of some sort, a deli, a restaurant, what have you, and they're kind of one-off orders. If you're in a situation where you are going to have a bunch of shelters or mobile feeding routes that are going to have a significant dollar amount spent on food. Obviously, you don't know exactly what, but if you believe that this operation is going to be going on for more than a couple weeks, and we've got a lot of people that we're feeding, and the estimate is that we're going to spend more than $25,000 with any particular vendor, then we have to set up a purchase order from them. And basically what we're saying there is Red Cross and this vendor or partner are going to come to an understanding that we are going to purchase food, meals from them, or ingredients, as the case may be, over a certain period of time. So say between now and I don't know, May 15th, and it's going to be approximately this many meals, and here's the cost per meal. We're going to come to an agreement on that, and that's going to be documented in an agreement, and we're going to have a purchase order. So basically, we're saying we think we're going to spend $30,000 with you, Safeway, I don't know, and we will just keep ordering and taking money off that purchase order as we go. And the reason that that's different from what we're doing in the prior examples is that they're not billing us every time they give us lunch or give us dinner. And so we've got this agreement, we're using up amounts off the purchase order over time, and then they're going to bill us. They're going to invoice us later. There's a lot more involved in purchase orders and feeding supplier agreements. There is a packet on OneSource with all the information, and I have also put in a link to that on the next page. Just know that if you're in a position where you're going to be ordering something of that size and you're going to need a purchase order, you are going to have help, whether it's headquarters, feeding team, pulling that all together for you, maybe with the help of mass care chief or the assistant director of operations, and or our national headquarters team will happily help us out if we need some assistance in working through the process of doing a purchase order and a supplier feeding agreement. I will click to this last page. These are references to documents and toolkits that I mentioned throughout. And I think we're ready for questions.
Thank you so much. And before we start with the questions, Mary and Kay, do you want to add on anything or say anything before we start with the questions?
Well, let me just say, I thought that was fantastic. I feel like I could do anything at the headquarters in terms of forms and datas. Hillary, thank you very much. I did want to
You're very welcome.
I did want to let people know that, first of all, I did love the spreadsheet, but also the Pacific Division on the team site has a very simple template, if you will, that actually adds numbers as you go along, that all of the regional feeding leads had agreed to a couple years ago. It's there. Please feel free to use it unless you have the skill that Hillary's talking about and can do more advanced spreadsheets. Also, I think it's important to note right now, this is one of the reasons we've always talked about requesting appropriate staff. So request an admin. Hillary said it a couple of times. There's lots of paperwork and it's better if you can stay up on it. So don't be shy. Ask for the staff you need if you are at HQ. Thanks, Iwe.
Yeah, and I would like to say, Hillary, great job. That was a fantastic presentation. This is so important And I think it is overwhelming for a lot of us. However, you put it out in a form where it's very easy to follow. So thank you. I do know that in feeding, if you do not keep up on it, like Mary said, then sometimes we have a mess at the very, very end of having to go back and find documentation for all of those. And that is not a good thing, and it's not a good job to have. So please keep up with it. It's easy to do. And let's go to questions, Iwe.
Thank you. Let's go to the questions in the Q&A first, and we'll screen through the rest of the questions if we have time in the chat. Okay, Hillary in the panel, we have a question. Can you give your P card, which is your purchase card, to a shelter worker, and will the worker be able to get the food and sign for the purchase?
I will tell you my experience. So the rules are you never give your card to anyone else. But the rules are also that you have to pay for food in this world. So what I ended up doing when I was in headquarters is I would not give my card to my team, but they had my card number and all the information they needed to use it. And the only time that causes an issue with vendors is in some cases, if you are going to pick up food from, say, a local restaurant, they need you to actually swipe or tap that card. And so you've got to find out when you're ordering, say you're ordering dinners at the local Chinese restaurant, just ask them, can I give you the number? Can I give you the credit card information now, or do you need me to have it in my hand? And you may have to switch vendors if they need it, especially if you're far away.
So let me just clarify. Yes, the policy is you don't ever hand out your P card. Sometimes you have to come up with workarounds, but more and more companies are letting you do orders online. And I happen to know KFC is one of them. So if you need to do it online, but that's exactly what Hillary was talking about.
Thank you. Let's go to a quick one. We mentioned the 7 p.m. reporting time. Is it Eastern, Pacific, local time zone? What time zone are we talking about?
It's DRO time zone. So wherever your DRO is, that's the time zone that you're working on.
Thank you so much. And you showed us your naming conventions. And is there any particular reason that you put the type of document and the date first instead of a location?
That's a good question. So I think you can do whatever works for you as long as you have everything in there. In that particular case, we opened and closed shelters. I think we had 80 something by the time everything was said and done. And so I actually had things separated into different file folders for the locations. And then it's just really easy to change the beginning of a file name, then change the middle, I guess. But you could do it whatever way works for you.
I think most of us do the receipt 6409 first.
Okay, thank you so much. And this will be a yes and no question. We talked about the 6409s, and we talked before about submitting 6409s. If you have separate vendors, submit a separate 6409s. And let's say that mass care or feeding, they already procured the stuff already. They're submitting the 6409, not asking logistics to procure it. Would it be possible, let's say you're going to Target to get some food and to get office supplies? Can those be on the same form of 6409, or do you still have to do separate 6409s for different items from the same receipt, same vendor, same credit card?
Okay, were you jumping in on that?
I can, go ahead, Kay.
No,
I can
go
answer
ahead, Mary.
that. Well, the accounting string is going to be different because the accounting string for food that indicates feeding is a different activity. So you would be basically doing double the work on one rather than doing two separate ones. Kay, what's your experience?
That's correct.
So do them separate. It's easier. Now, if you're going to get food 2 different times, 2 days in a row from Target, let's say, you're going to go get cold breakfast items 2 days in a row or 3 days in a row. Feel free to put all the food items together. But, if you're going to have food and diapers and office supplies, no, that's not going to work.
So
And
let me ask a follow-up question. So let's say Target again, you got chips. Let's just pretend this is chips. Then someone needs Tylenol and you got both supplies and it's the same receipt. Would you be able to use that the same thing because it all goes to mass care and coding all mass care? Or do you still need a separate 6409 for two separate things?
Well, the easiest way to do that would be to make 3 copies of the receipt, because you have Tylenol, you have office supplies, and you have food, and then do separate ones. But I would defer to some other people who have other experiences in that area, because I'm going to have to have 3 different accounting strings on that particular 6409, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah. I would have 3 copies of the receipt and cross out the other 2 and match it up with the 6409. So same way, Mary.
Because I'll tell you,
remember,
go ahead,
I was just
Hillary.
going to say, there's always someone you can ask. If you're not sure, like we could come up with 100 different scenarios. You've got a supervisor, there's headquarters. If your headquarters feeding manager doesn't know, they can easily go over and ask supply or go ask the finance person. There's always an answer somewhere, and we just keep hunting until we get it.
Right.
And quickly, I don't want to pass the buck, but remember, you're not responsible for the 6409s for Tylenol or diapers or office supplies, unless you're using the office supplies in feeding. You're responsible for the feeding supplies.
Thank you so much. And I love the answer of you can always ask someone on that particular DR for some supervisors to answer that question. Okay, next question. The field goes back and forth about standards of meals, whether it's served or meals ordered. If it is a meal served, is there a tracking document from one source for tracking meals served?
There are some documents on one source for feeding, and I believe they were last updated in 2015. So you can have at it, or you can use what Mary was talking about, the one for this division, or one that you have from another DR that worked really well. There's not a set of really good spreadsheets that National has shared.
Thank you. And how do we, when we go on one source to look for tax exemption forms, what search word should we type in to look for the tax exemption letter? I will
Tax
I
exemption
will
letter.
take that. It's going to be tax exempt. So if you go on one source and if you search tax exempt, each state has a tax exemption letter. A complete file PDF sometimes is 50 pages that you can share with a vendor for that. Okay, we have 6 minutes. Let's go to another one. How do we handle donated items such as pizza, sandwiches, candy, bottled water, or sodas?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
How do we handle donated items such as pizza, sandwiches, candy, bottled water, soda?
So I think there's 2 answers, two different topics there. One is, are we going to accepted, and how do we deal with someone that wants to donate? Hopefully they don't just show up at your shelter with 20 pizzas after everybody has just eaten. But sticking to the topic at hand, there is another form, you guys caught me that I left one out. It is called your 6455, and I can't remember what the actual name of that is. Hopefully
in-kind
John She's not
donation.
on here. Oh, yes. So those are in-kind donations. So if you've worked with somebody and they said, hey, I'd really like to help out, can I serve dinner one day? You know, from my taco truck or whatever, and it's a legit business and it's, you know, passes all the tests and all that, then that's a donation form. And you're basically, instead of somebody giving you cash, you are filling out a form that says that this dinner was donated by Jack's Taco Truck and the amount of this for feeding at XYZ shelter. And it's a quite simple form to fill out. One thing to remember, though, is we only accept donated items that are already included in the service delivery plan. And not specifically, it won't say, well, if Jack's Taco Truck decides to donate, we'll take it. We know that we have to feed our clients dinner every day, right? So that's already included in our budget. If one time we get it from Jack's Taco Truck instead of the Safeway Deli, great. It works, no problem. We just fill out that form and they can account for it on the finance side.
Thank you. And can you help us understand? Let's see, we have 4 more minutes. Can you help us understand the purpose of 6409? So are we saying that when we submit a 6409, it triggers the feeding manager to call the food vendor and say, hey, we need 8 meals? Or like, what do we do?
So with almost anything else, that's exactly right. If you needed paper towels and toilet paper for your shelter and there was not a fulfillment operation going on already, you would fill that out, you'd give it to logistics, and they would send somebody out to buy it and bring it to you. With feeding, it's a bit different, obviously, because we know that we need to feed people. That's part of what we do, right? So we're going to have to get food every day. We're kind of filling out the 6409 after the fact in order to get the accounting and the tracking and all of that to match up and to be right. So in other words, if it's lunchtime and I need to feed lunch to my shelter, I don't need to ask permission to do that, right? We know that there's permission to feed our clients. That's what we do. So I'm going to fill out that 6409, but I'm not going to have some of the information like the dollar amount until I actually pick up the food or have it delivered. So it's sort of the one time that you can do that bit of paperwork after the fact. So you're not asking for permission to get lunch. You're saying, I got lunch and this is what it is. Cool. And they say yes.
Right. And I wanted to clarify that, when we're saying that we're doing the after the fact, we're simply saying that this is a small purchase. This is different when you have a purchase order, when you have a vendor that is doing $25,000 of meals. Those are different. Those has to be pre-approved very, very early on. So when you're in a large operation, a national operation, whether it's Guam, whether it's hurricanes, you're submitting the purchase orders ahead of time. So then those can get approved because those are not hundreds of dollars. Those are millions of dollars that we're talking about. So keep in mind
Absolutely.
that when we say we're specifically using this example right now, saying that we're not talking about the field kitchens, we're not talking about those long-term vendors that we're using over for, thousands of dollars. We're only talking about a couple $100 that we're referring to. Okay, we have 1 minute left.
Eva,
I
we
think,
have a hand raised. Could we do that?
yeah, 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, David, would you like to come off mic? David, if you're not talking, we're not able to hear you.
There he goes.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. I was gonna, pardon me. I was gonna make a comment as a log person who deals with a lot of the requisitions and things from feeding. I would just want to encourage you. Number one, if you're using an MCPC card, remember those things can only be reloaded 3 times. So you only have a total of $1,500 until national. They're talking about raising the limit on it, but they haven't done it yet. So you only have $1,500 to play with. Make sure you fill out that log completely and turn it in as soon as you can. Those things actually go to the supply function and we hold on to them. We never see them, but ultimately to get it reloaded, you're going to need to have all that data in there, as Hillary had mentioned. Second thing is I would emphasize P card transactions and 6409s. Please put the P card number and the last name of the individual on the 6409 there's a little box down there called other. Just write those 4 digits down in the last name. It makes it so much easier for the supply person who has to go in and enter that data into our tracker. And the other thing that we do in supply, we keep track of how much money you folks spend, believe it or not. And when you hit, say you have a feeding contract with a particular vendor, we're tracking those dollars. And when you reach that point that you're within a couple $100 or $1,000, if you're doing big purchases of the authorized amount, we're going to let you guys know so that you can ask if you need it for an increase in that amount. And it is a process that we do through supply. So just so
Thank
you're
you.
aware of that. And please don't wait until the last minute to submit your 6409s. It absolutely buries the supply function and it delays things. We do reporting on a daily basis on P card purchases. So that amount goes into the 6409. The MCPC, it's a fixed amount. It really doesn't impact
David,
anything. Yes.
David, thank you so much for your input. I'm sorry to cut you off. We're
Sure.
2 minutes over. Thank you so much for your input.
Okay.
Mary and Kay, do we have anything to add on before we conclude the session and we'll get the questions next time?
No, I think we'll check the Q&As and make sure everyone's questions gets answered individually. And Hillary, if you could join us real briefly afterwards for a quick debrief.
Sure.
Kay had to jump off.
Okay.
Thank you so much all. We'll see you next week, same time. Thank you.